Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. Blood dripped off the silvery edge of the katana slowly. He reversed the grip and watched as the red life-giving liquid slipped down the blade, sheathing its sharp brilliance and soaking the leather-wrapped hilt. Eventually, the hilt gave and blood droplets flowed downward, soaking the gloved hand that was tightly gripping it. The wolf wondered idly at how much soap would have to be spent trying to get the stains off. He decided it would be easier to get them to issue him a new blade. Not that it mattered, of course. The rest of him was splattered with the red stuff and other, more odoriferous, bodily fluids. And this was not the first time. His armor was tinged a permanent shade of rust even when it was freshly scrubbed. Years of ill-tended bloodstains had taken their toll. There was no cleaning agent that would suffice to remove the marks now. Nor, he supposed, would the odor ever truly leave. He knew the stench of blood clung to him and permeated the area, but his usually sensitive nose failed to react. After 14 years as a shinobi, he was inured to such. It was odd really. Shinobi were supposed, according to a scroll he had read as a young child, to possess the keenest sight, the most acute sense of smell, and the sharpest hearing. Yet, the best ninjas he knew, the most proficient and experienced ones, were those who had learned not to see, smell, hear, or ever truly experience. Either that or they were completely insane. You see, it was easier to kill, to take a life not because it was justified, but simply because you were ordered to, without your senses. Most of the Anbu learned to switch them off early on. Those who did not, went mad, died or left, or did all three sometimes, early on. Though, there were the few lucky ones who managed to perform their jobs without having to amputate such an integral part of their humanity. These fortunate individuals were rarely affected while on a job. Instead, they relived every aspect of their kills in dreamscape, from the coppery tang of blood pervading the scene, to the sound of a sharpened blade as it slid cleanly through a man's guts and the sight of red paint spraying over it all. Kakashi slept very little at night. He had dealt with it for years now, content with stealing seconds from the Sandman. After all, he had never been a particularly deep sleeper, not with his father's face looming in the background. The past few years had taken their toll on him. Lost teammates, lost sensei, lost sleep, lost sanity. Indeed, somewhere along the way, he had completely, utterly, lost it all. At 6, he had lost his innocence. At 10, he had lost the ice protecting his heart, thawing under the influence of Team 7. At 14, he had lost the last, and perhaps the only, person who had truly known him. And at the grand old age of 19, he realized he had lost his life, there was no meaning left to it anymore. The telltale sensation of chakra being molded snapped him out of his musing. He narrowed his focus and identified the incoming arrivals via his nin-dog senses. A pair of shinobi, both strong, Junin level at least. And friendly. He relaxed at the realization and knelt beside the corpse in front of him, methodically stripping the body of any useful items before moving to the equally stiff body beside it. Before his squad mates had fully teleported to the scene, the wolf had relieved most of the dead shinobi of their possessions. The boar and the cat said nothing as they bent to aid him. The wolf was comfortable with these two, testament to the many missions they had survived. His fingers stumbled for a moment, slipping on the slick surface of the entrails peeking through the dead enemy nin's torn tunic. He had killed her earlier, catching her at the perfect angle with that ruined katana of his. A hand reached out to him, almost brushing his shoulder. The wolf spun around with deadly grace and pinned the kunyuchi to the tree, the edge of his sword already pressed to the other's throat, and froze. Shinobi who hurt their friends are lower than trash. The words of a dead idealist echoed in his ears, bringing with it a strange disorientation that settled into his limbs, miring them in the past. Always protect your team, the favorite saying of another dead ninja snapped him back to the present. He dropped the katana and leaned against a nearby ruin, adamantly avoiding the sight of the single bead of blood that was slowly sliding down the cat's throat. The trio did not stir until the remaining member of their squad returned. The four proceeded back in silence: the boar, the cat, the wolf, and the weasel. They were the best. The incident would not affect them in the least. They were Anbu. Later, in the numbingly chill shower, the wolf realized that this was not true. The cat, you see, had just walked in with the boar. The young weasel was already drowning his anguish beside him. The weasel's black hair lay flat on his scalp and his eyes glowed an eerie red, 3 pinwheels in each of them spinning furiously at the ceiling. His young, soft and yet scarred skin would have shocked many. The wolf did not care. What made his shaking double was not the freely bleeding gash adorning the weasel's teenage body. It was not the dried blood which had turned the boar's white hair crimson. It was not even the glazed emptiness in their eyes which reflected his own. The sight of a long line of reddish raised skin that glared at him from the cat's neck turned his stomach. The memory of spinning her around and digging the blade into her neck shamed. The memory of the insatiable bloodlust, that manic irrational desire to kill, to feel his blade sever tendons and watch blood spurt out in a glorious fountain, scared him. For the first time in nearly a decade and a half as a Konoha shinobi, Itachi Kakashi was truly scared. And so for the first time in his life, he had reason to take the coward's path. He ran away. At the old age of barely 19, after nearly 6 long years in the Anbu and gaining a place in the bingo books of virtually every other shinobi village, Kakashi retired. The little boy trudged down the road sadly. It was his birthday today. But all of Konoha was in mourning. After 5 years as an orphan, being ignored was not a new thing. Still, it hurt that on this day, even the comfort of school had been taken away from him. Today was a day so special that his class at the Shinobi Academy had been cancelled. No Iruka sensei to annoy, no Shikamaru, Choji and Kiba to make mischief with, not that the 3 were his friends, mind you. He had made no friends. Naruto remembered his first day there and the irrational hope that had filled him. He had believed that someone would finally come up and talk to him. He had prayed that without their parents around to pull them back, his peers would be friendlier. But life was rarely fair. Still, it was fun to be around those 3 and feel like there was somewhere he belonged, even if it were only among the outcasts and only for a while. He sighed again. There was no school today. The blonde scrunched up his face at that and blinked tears out of his eyes. It was so unfair. Just because the 4th Hokage had died on this day eons ago to save this village didn't mean that they should all continue to plunge themselves into mourning. In fact, Naruto was quite sure that the 4th had never meant it to be this way. Even then, he had to admire the respect and recognition given to all 4 of the Hokages. He raised his head and smiled at that. Someday I will be Hokage, and everyone will have to acknowledge me, Uzumaki Naruto. He pledged. A huge hand grabbed his shoulder roughly and shook him. Hey, kid, what are you doing, loitering about at this hour? Can't you give us some peace, demon? An angry voice demanded. The small boy turned around and recoiled from the man, blue eyes wide with surprise. The man in front of him was missing a leg and was leaning on a crude wooden crutch. His eyes were bloodshot and Naruto could smell alcohol on his breath an arm's length away. The man leered at him and leaned forward, causing the child to scramble backward in fear. So, the monster is scared, the man taunted cruelly. The guys around him laughed and Naruto realized in panic that 7 others now ringed him. He knew what they wanted. This wasn't the first time after all and he doubted it would be the last. Naruto had gone back home bruised and even bloody before, but no one had been there. No one ever would. The injuries had always been easily explained away to the occasional prying adults who had been few and far between. But this was the first time there were so many of them. Naruto had a bad feeling about this. After all, there were worse things than being ignored. He was found hours later, curled up in a tree hollow. Uchiha Ryuga almost gagged at the sight before him. He was an experienced chunin and a veteran police officer, but none of his missions had prepared him for this twisted sight. A blonde-haired 5-year-old, 6 since a few hours ago, lay huddled in the hollow. His young face was peaceful and angelic in sleep. The sight should have been one that made annoying aunts coo and pinch his cheeks, and for a mother to look fondly upon, right before she kissed him goodnight. But this little boy had no mother, and that made all the difference. Blood covered the child and had soaked his clothes a dark crimson. His hair was matted with the stuff. Huge bruises peppered the exposed skin. Ryuga could see through the tattered white shirt and jeans ensemble the boy wore. And the wounds, they were a garish sight. Whoever had done them was obviously not in his right mind. The kid's limbs were mangled and bled furiously. By all accounts, he should have been dead. Ryuga did not think he would live long. Sandaime stared at the hospital bed. The huge white bed dwarfed the tiny figure that lay smothered in blankets. The bruising discoloring the boy's face was slowly vanishing. Being the carrier of the nine-tailed demon had advantages, it seemed. What would you have done, Yondaime? The old man wondered wearily. Just a month ago, Yondaime's other charge had appeared, mask broken in pieces. No words had been needed. The existence of the ANBU was a necessary evil. It could be argued that shinobi were a necessary evil. But both were needed. Konoha was one of the only hidden villages that allowed that ninjas to live a normal life, or at least have a taste of it. That, the Hokage thought, only made it more difficult to be a Konoha Anbu. Most gave up the job after a couple of years, if they were not already dead or driven to insanity. Hitaki Kakashi had joined the Anbu when he was 13. And, if memory served, it had been 19 years since he had stood in the White Fang's home, attending the celebration of his son's birth. 6 years doing what no child or teenager should be asked to, and the look in Hitaki's eyes yesterday, he had failed the White Fang in the fourth. He closed his eyes and sighed deeply. And now, the Hokage glanced over at the blonde child slumbering under the influence of drugs. He had failed again. A nanny was supposed to be looking after the child. The Sandaime had spoken to the woman yesterday. Apparently, a demon was not worth caring for. He winced at the memory. Demon? His eyes traced the strange marks on the child's cheeks. They had not been there when Naruto was born. Flames licked at his sandals, burning all that was in sight. The cries of many rang in his ears. It would be the last sound many of them uttered. Mama, Papa, let me go. Screams pierced his ears. Sarutobi would later remember them. Soot covered his arms as he worked feverishly to quell the fires ravaging the village. He wished he could do more. He caught a glimpse of silver hair and an Anbu masked shinobi cradling a bundle. Kakashi, where are you going? The Kyuubi is in that direction. The fourth ordered me to bring him. What? Then is he planning to use that jutsu? Yes. Sarutobi glanced down at the bundle in the Kakashi's arms. Blonde strands of hair already capped the newborn's head, making it clear whose child this was. The infant was sleeping soundly amidst all the destruction. The mother. She died in childbirth, came the cold reply. He nodded at that, freeing the young wolf to go on his way. Good luck, Minato. I have never known a better man or a better shinobi. The sudden explosion of a nearby house knocked him sideways. He dodged the debris and landed, his hands already forming seals. There was no rest for the weary. The Sandaime snapped out of the memory. He had been reminiscing far too much lately. It was a sign, he supposed, that he was too old to be doing this. He had broken the trust of many, ignored the promises he had made to others and himself. Inspiration struck him. Naruto clearly needed a guardian. As the Hokage, he had no time to look after a small child, and there were precious few who could be trusted with the boy. As for Kakashi, Kakashi needed to remember how to be human. And who better to teach him that than a certain boisterous blonde? Sandaime smiled at his solution. He wasn't called the professor for nothing. Kakashi stared at the forehead protector in his hands. He ran roughened fingers over soft blue cloth and cool steel before tracing the stylized leaf emblem in the center. A variety of nicks and cuts marred the mounted metal plate, despite the years it had spent in storage. The Hittite had belonged to his sensei. It was all he had left of him really. This, and the memory of bright yellow hair framing gentle blue eyes that held infinite love and wisdom, were all that were left. The day Yondaime died had been the day Kakashi had abandoned his own protector. He had thrown it into the river, for a wolf mask. He had been Anbu for all of 5 hours before. He pushed the memory away. Today, Hitaki Kakashi reminded himself, was a day for new beginnings. He would wear Sensei's forehead protector in remembrance in the hope that he would be half as good a teacher as Minato Sensei. He nodded the protector with the air of one who is used to doing such a thing. Old habits died hard. He paused at the dark green Junin vest, eyeing it for a moment before slipping into it gingerly. The weight of the vest was decidedly unfamiliar. For all his experience in the ways of a shinobi, Hitaki Kakashi had never worn a ninja vest before. Even after becoming a Junin, he had still been too small to be unencumbered by it. As an Anbu, he had been required to abandon all that could, and would, give his village of origin away. A Junin sensei, though, had no need of such deception. Today, he realized, he would be walking into the mission room sans hooded cloak or porcelain mask. He would be getting a new student. Kakashi smiled at the thought. He did not search out responsibility normally, nor did it search him out. His penchant for being chronically late was, no doubt, the culprit, but only now did he realize how much he was looking forward to teaching the younger generation. Had Sensei felt this way the day he had been assigned to teach him? Probably not. Kakashi had long known that Minato Namikaze had been one of the more ardent protesters against the change in rules that allowed children to take lessons at the age of 5 and graduate at 7. Kakashi himself had been an exception. He had entered the academy at 4 and graduated 6 months later. He had barely been 5 at the time. It was ironic though that the youngest Junin had been the one protesting the rule. In a way though, had been fitting that Minato Sensei, who had been so against his promotion, had become his teacher in the end. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Kakashi stepped toward the door before catching a glimpse of the bathroom mirror through doors that he had forgotten to close. He fumed inwardly. The mirror was the same as it had been since, well, forever. It was plain with not even a border encompassing it and was slightly rusty at the edges. A yellowed, tattered piece of paper with his own childish script on it was stuck on a corner. Kakashi had not looked upon it for many years, but he could still recite, from memory, what the note said. We pledge our lives in service of a greater cause. Though we may do what many would not. Though we may do what we would rather not. Though souls be stained and sentenced to the blight. Still, we serve. For this is our calling, and this is our life. To serve with valor and to die with honor. This is the will of fire. It was the shinobi pledge of Konoha, set down at the top of a large stone, which was now a memorial for those who died in action, by the Shadaime himself. Still, the problem was not the decrepit state of the mirror. Nor was it the ragged state of what should exist in every Konoha ninja's house. The problem, in fact, had nothing to do with the mirror and everything to do with its owner. The aforementioned owner was currently cursing at his stupidity. For a genius, he sure was dense. He could just see himself now, patrolling the streets as Konoha's friendly, and of course finest, shinobi, or in his case, monster. Kakashi zipped through the training grounds and into the village. He was once again late and was soaked to the bone. Nevertheless, he slouched into the mission room, looking every inch the infamous copy nin, any sign of his previous anxiety gone. He gave his name to one of the Chunins, daring the low-ranked shinobi to take the bait by leaning across the man's table and dripping rainwater onto his papers. The Chunin merely handed Kakashi a slip of paper. Report to me in my office. I have a special assignment for you. Hokage. Kakashi gulped at that as he glanced at the wall clock. It was 9:30. His meeting had been scheduled for 0730H. No one kept the Hokage waiting, not even him. He slinked through the door slowly, and froze. Memories flooded him at the sight of the familiar uniform he had donned just a month ago, and the recollection of what he had nearly done staggered him. Bile rose in his throat and he clenched and unclenched his fingers as he strode into the Hokage's office unchallenged. He barely registered the guard's salutation and the query after his health. He slouched in a corner, waiting for the Hokage, dazed and shaken at his powerful reaction to the Anbu. The sound of someone breathing shallowly made him start before he belatedly realized that he was the sole occupant of the room. Shinobi Rule 25. Remember Shinobi Rule number 25, damn it. He chanted over and over in his head, trying to quell his inner turmoil. His shaking hands were already hidden in his pockets. A soft cough and the acrid smell of smoke interrupted his thoughts, and Kakashi barely concealed his startled jump. He was once again thankful that his mask obscured his facial expressions. Kakashi-kun, you are very late, aren't you? The voice was amused and gently reprimanded him, banishing all planned excuses. Kakashi shifted uneasily like an academy student, before regaining his composure. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, he replied with a bow, offering no excuse and knowing that the Hokage would ask for none. Kakashi lied to many over his tardiness, but never to the Hokage. The protege of the first and the second knew all too well how the fourth's pupil spent his time. Sarutobi studied the young man with a slight frown. So many years had passed, too many for the young man in front of him to still be grieving. Then again, who was to say that 6 or 8 years were too long a time to grieve for a beloved sensei and a close comrade? Ah, it is just as well, I suppose. Naruto-kun is likely to have just woken up. Come, follow me, he said, breaking the slight tension and striding through another door, down a long flight of stairs. He was, Kakashi realized with surprise, heading toward the guest rooms, which often housed visiting dignitaries. Not many shinobi were privileged with such information, but Kakashi had once had the honor of being assigned to the Hokage's guard, and that had required him to know the tower intimately. Also, he had been one of the fourth students. After the deaths of Obito and Rin, both of them had been too busy with the war. Despite his youth, Kakashi had been thrust into the front lines as a commander, mostly because of his habit of getting all his squad mates out alive. Minato, of course, had been busy with tactics and the sort. The fourth had eventually taken to inviting Kakashi to his quarters for tea whenever either of them had the time. It had been, Kakashi reflected, a move calculated to keep their bond of teacher and student alive long after they were no longer connected by that thin superficial thread. It had worked though. As he followed the Sandame, his mind working furiously. What would a genin be doing in the Hokage's guest rooms? And that name, it was so familiar. A memory teased tantalizingly at the edge of his consciousness, flitting away elusively the moment he tried to grab at it. That name was just so damn familiar. He swore it was from one of the Ika Ika novels. Perhaps the boy was the son of someone important. That would explain why Sarutobi-sama had chosen him to teach the boy one-on-one. Kakashi might be new to this whole teaching thing, but he was one of the more experienced Junin around. Also, his reputation was enough to mollify any aristocrat, or said aristocrat's son. An unpleasant prospect cropped up at the thought. If the boy was the son of some daimyo or an important official, then he would most likely be stuck up, arrogant, and worst of all, just playing at being a shinobi. He had no desire to humor a brat who just fancied being a ninja. Perhaps even Anbu work would have been better, but no, he shied away from that line of thinking. Anything at all was better than being a mere tool, better than being consumed by his work and having to take pills just so he could find sleep without waking up with a raw throat. Even babysitting some idealistic kid who knew shit about ninjas and their dirty work. He stopped automatically when the Hokage's footsteps ceased. The third was standing in front of one of the identical brown doors that lined a corridor near the top of the Hokage tower. The Hokage gestured to him to hide as he opened the door, and Kakashi obliged with a single puzzled glance. One did not simply question one's superiors, be it out in the battlefield, or in the Hokage tower. It was a lesson Hitaki Kakashi had learned the hard way. A blonde blur whirled out of the room and attacked the Hokage. Kakashi tensed momentarily at that but relaxed at the Sandame's smiling face. Old man, you're finally here. I've been stuck here for ages. Can I go out? Huh, come on, please. I'm fine now. See. The boy let go of the Hokage's legs and lifted his shirt, showing a network of healing pink scars that crisscrossed his chest. The Junin's eyes widened at that. Sure, he had seen worse on both his comrades and himself, but never on so young a child. More importantly, how had the child survived such injuries? This kid was not normal at all. Kakashi's experience with children had been limited that of his genin teammates. And not even Obito had been so loud and boisterous. Nor had even infinitely optimistic Rin been as cheerful as this blonde bundle. His eyes wandered back to the kid, drawn by the suddenly despondent tone. Besides, I'm lonely, the boy said, scuffing the floor with his tiny shoe. The kid was smaller than even Kakashi had been when he was 5. Naruto looked underfed and very, very young. Too young, Kakashi thought, to have graduated, or even to be attending the academy in this time of peace. The kid looked up from the floor, his eyes gazing imploringly at Konoha's third Hokage. Kakashi took the chance to get a good look at his new student's face. It was chubby with baby fat and unmarred by whatever accident that had scarred his chest, marked only by 3 faint whisker marks that ran down each cheek. Sudden realization hit Kakashi, as he remembered with clarity, the name, Naruto. Kakashi-kun, I need you to bring the child to me. Minato shouted over the chaos. But, sensei, he hesitated. Go, now, we have no time. The words were short and his tone clipped. But still the wolf tarried, torn between loyalty to Konoha and his concern for his sensei. Hitaki, I said now. Konoha's yellow flash thundered, frustrated at the precious seconds wasted. Every moment he stood here arguing meant another 10 houses destroyed and more civilian casualties. Hitaki Kakashi was an exemplary shinobi. He always obeyed orders. Or at least, that was what his Chunin sensei had written on his graduation report. He was wrong. He will be all alone, sensei. The words blurted out before he could stop them. Minato Namikaze understood in that instant why the boy was so resistant. His eyes softened for just a moment. Kakashi's mother had died at birth, his father had slit his own throat, choosing to die rather than live with shame. Kakashi was Anbu. He had been an elite shinobi, a Junin, for 3 years. But deep down, he was still a scared silver-haired orphan boy, who did not want to lose his sensei, and who did not want to condemn another to his life of loneliness and countless rules. A distant roar shook him out of it. He had no time to reassure his student and tell him all would be fine. Hysteria gripped him at the irony. The one time Kakashi actually looked to him for comfort was when he could not afford to give it. He will have his mother, the Yondaime had replied softly, his blue eyes pleading Kakashi to understand. The boy nodded once, tightly, and the fourth turned to leave. How will I find you, Hokage-sama? The Hokage smiled at that. How like you, Kakashi-kun, to put it all behind you. You'll know, came the grim reply. Kakashi leapt away to the Hokage tower. A medic nin stood watch over a cot in his sensei's quarters. He watched Kakashi take the sleeping newborn out of the cot wordlessly. He was expected. The mother? He queried tonelessly. She's dead. Grief grabbed him for a moment. Uzumaki Kushina had always been welcoming toward the serious solemn boy her beloved had taken under his wing. A lesser woman might have resented the boy's intrusion into their lives, but not her. She had fed him, comforted him when his sensei could not, and even taught him some mean ninjutsu and taijutsu. And now she was gone. Just like Minato sensei would be in a few hours. Loss was not something new to the 13-year-old and he mentally walled his grief out. He glanced down at the cherubic face of the infant he held cautiously. Did she name him Naruto? Uzumaki Naruto, the Chunin said. Uzumaki Naruto, Good luck. You're going to need it, he thought as he flew over the rooftops toward the fiery battle being waged. He had forgotten, Kakashi realized. How? He did not know, but he had forgotten. He stepped out of the shadows, startling the boy into hiding behind the third. He was surprised to see a pair of wary eyes tracking his every step. His masked appearance gave others little reason for trust and caused fear. It was one of the reasons he wore the thing in the first place. It gave him a psychological advantage over his opponents. But the jumpy somber child in front of him was so markedly different from the brat he had seen moments ago that Kakashi actually paused in his stride and looked at the Sandame. Sarutobi glanced down at the child's face and frowned at the fearful expression. It's all right, Naruto-kun. He won't harm you. He is actually quite nice, the man said with a comforting smile. Kakashi barely suppressed a snort at that. Nice. Ha. Would it help if I introduced you? The boy nodded at the offer. Uzumaki Naruto meet Hitaki Kakashi, your Junin sensei and your guardian for the next few years, the Hokage said. Kakashi glared at the Sandame as the boy yelled. What? But I don't know him, old man. What if he's some other stupid drunk who likes to beat kids up? How would you know? This last was said in a quavering voice, tears sparkling in the kid's eyes. Kakashi merely chose to raise an eyebrow at the Hokage's announcement. The boy had done enough shouting for them both. Well, I guess it's best that I dispel him of the notion that I eat children for breakfast, Kakashi thought with a sigh, resolutely ignoring the little voice that whispered that he had done things much worse than eating little children. Hitaki Kakashi had no idea how to deal with little kids, especially those that were afraid of him. So he did the first thing that came to mind, remembering how a larger blonde had once diffused a similar situation involving a silver-haired boy. He squatted down to the boy's eye level and I smiled at him, projecting friendliness. Naruto smiled back. It wasn't a full smile and it was slightly mollified, but it was a smile. And that, Kakashi decided, was a start. After they had sent the boy in to pack his meager belongings, Kakashi fixed a hard gaze on the Hokage. Guardian, he questioned, an edge to his voice. The boy has not had an easy life, Kakashi, the Hokage answered, meeting his eyes with a clear gaze. He will survive, he replied coldly. Usually, Kakashi was not one to question the Sandame. But strictly speaking, this was not a mission. This involved the Hokage placing the care of someone else under his responsibility. And that someone else happened to be a very young, very vulnerable boy, who happened to be Minato's son. So he looked at the Hokage, wanting him to take those words back. He could watch over the boy. Yes, he could do that much for his teacher and Uzumaki-san, but only as the boy's sensei and nothing else. Kakashi had never been comfortable around others. He had spent most of his childhood in solitude because he was the orphan of the disgraced White Fang and he was a genius. Those who were different, he had learned early on, were shunned and feared. So he had reveled in his differences, welcomed solitude with open arms and resolved not to need anyone else. He scared away the students who had tried to talk to him at the academy, shot down Maida Guy's constant battle challenges, snubbed his temporary Genin teammates during the Chunin exam, and pissed off his teachers by acting the aloof smart aleck, not that it had been much of a stretch. Then Minato-sensei had come. And no matter how infuriating Kakashi had tried to be with his scurrilous words and insulting attitude, and how cold-hearted he'd acted, Minato had always stayed, always offered advice and comfort. Then, Rin and Obito had appeared. One had been mysterious and annoying with her furious blushes and mother hen ways. The other had been an idealistic crybaby who got under his skin and who had not been worthy of the title, shinobi. He had accepted Rin the day she had matched blows with him during taijutsu practice and then expertly mended his broken leg and her own dislocated shoulder. Obito, he had admitted to himself that he liked the boy just moments before his death. But never had Hitaki Kakashi sought out friendship or any sort of connection to another human being. So he looked at the Hokage coldly, part of him mollified that the cage trusted him so much, another part of him screaming in horror at the thought. 13. Kakashi. I've had 13 minders walk out on me in the past 2 years. None of the shinobi I assigned to guard him did it properly. They all claim the same thing, that he's a monster. Pity stirred in some forgotten corner of his heart, but he remained cold outwardly. The Hokage looked at him sharply, his gaze piercing the barrier of icy aloofness Kakashi often erected between himself and the world at large. Some drunkards beat him up, Kakashi. He would have died if they had found him any later, the man they called the professor said softly, guilt overlaying his normally firm voice. Kakashi felt his gut wrench at that. If only it were any other boy, he sighed silently, accepting defeat. He won't fit in my apartment, Hokage-sama, he said. I've arranged for you two to stay in a rented house on the town outskirts, the Hokage said, smiling broadly at Kakashi's unspoken compliance. Kakashi twitched. He hated big houses, they were too open. I don't know how to take care of a child, he searched for an excuse, unwilling to go down without a fight. We both know that you took care of your father when you were his age, Kakashi. Kakashi's face tightened at the reminder before he bowed curtly, accepting defeat with grace. Naruto chose that moment to enter. Let's go, he chirped. Kakashi was slightly startled by the sudden mood change. It was going to take some time to get used to the child's mercurial ways. He sighed for the umpteenth time that day and thought something that would have made any Nara proud. This was going to be troublesome. Naruto sat cross-legged on the linoleum floor and waited. The orange cup in front of him was closed by an equally orange aluminum cover. He looked at the clock. Not yet. He opened the foil slightly, just enough for the smell of miso ramen to waft out of the cup. Oh, it smelled so good. His fingers itched to rip the cover off and shovel the noodles into his mouth. But no, he would wait. Patience, Naruto, a ninja must have patience. Ha, who said he didn't listen to Higurashi-sensei's lectures? His eyes darted to the clock face again. Yosh, only 1 minute left. He flexed his fingers and bounced up and down on his heels. He eyed the man seated across from him. The only part of his so-called guardian that was visible was a thatch of unruly hair of questionable color. The rest of the ninja was buried in an orange novel, not that he would be able to see the man even with the book lowered. Kakashi's Hitai and face mask obscured most of the man's face. That was, Naruto realized, another oddity of his guardians that he had to add to an already long list. In short, Kakashi was weird. The shinobi suddenly shifted and a sound that was suspiciously like a giggle escaped from him. Yep, the guy was off his rocker for sure, no doubt about it. His new nanny had dragged Naruto to his own apartment, saying that they'd stay there until he bought a bigger one or, the Junin had said with a shudder, a house. Apparently, houses were evil. That shudder and the giggle he had just heard were the only signs of emotion Naruto had seen Kakashi display in the 4 hours they had spent together. He glanced at the clock and then at Kakashi's hair. He sighed moodily and stared some more. Perhaps if he stared long enough, Kakashi's hair would catch fire and then the guy would move. He looked at the clock again. Yosh, it was time to eat. Itadakimasu, he said before diving into the large cup and shoving noodles into his mouth as fast as he could. Kakashi slowly lowered the book, his heart still thudding from that shocking yell. Kakashi had faced hardened assassins, psychotic geniuses, monsters of all sorts, as well as one particular guy from Iwamagakure who had loved to drink blood. But he had never had to witness a 6-year-old trying to sit still for 5 minutes before. He had also never seen anybody, not even the Akamichis, eat so enthusiastically. He carefully reached toward his own ramen cup, never taking his eyes off the frightening spectacle in front of him. He pulled down his mask by reflex. The mask was too uncomfortable to be worn at home as well. He picked up the ramen cup and chopsticks and began to eat slowly, enjoying the luxurious pace. Ah, ramen was such comfort food. Kakashi loved his ramen dearly and was always well stocked with it. Still, watching the way Naruto was gulping the stuff down, he would most likely need to buy more. Kakashi was not the ramen fanatic Naruto clearly was. Unless the boy was starving. But no other than the already healing wounds in his small size, Naruto looked healthy. Surely Sandaime would not have let the boy starve. Nah, the kid was just a ramen enthusiast, that's all. Seriously though, the child should learn to appreciate finer food. Then again, Kakashi was supposed to be his sensei. Yes, it was decided, he would teach Naruto all about delicious food other than ramen. Like eggplant soup for instance. Eggplant soup, Kakashi drooled as he slurped his ramen. Soft squishy eggplant, oh it had been too long. That was it. He was buying eggplant soup for dinner tonight. He could just imagine it now, drinking the thick warm soup and letting the smooth brinjal pieces slide down his throat, all while reading the latest Ika novel. Oh yes, that would be bliss. No memories, no missions, no nosy people, no a shriek interrupted his paradise. Naruto had finished eating and was now staring avidly at Kakashi's uncovered face. His mouth was wide open. Kakashi gazed back nonchalantly, bracing himself inwardly for the inevitable shout of horror. What? How come you look so young? What did you do? Use some ninja thing to look younger, is it? Naruto yelled. Kakashi blinked at Naruto stupidly. I'm 19, he said calmly, infuriating the child with his attitude. What? But you have gray hair. The boy shouted as he hopped on top of the table. How can you be my nanny, or my sensei? You're too young. I'm a Junin, Kakashi said flatly, tiring of the argument. He'd never known that little kids were more tiring than a full workout. What? Are you sure? The boy leaned close to Kakashi's face, narrowing his eyes as he squinted at the older boy. Ha, I bet you're lying. You're probably just some Chunin who's trying to act cool. Kakashi snapped at that. His Sharingan flared dangerously. If there was one thing he'd always been touchy about, it was his age. I've been a shinobi since I was 5. I killed a man for the first time when I was younger than you are now. If you have any complaints, tell them to Hokage-sama, though I doubt he'll do anything. The truth is, Naruto, that no one wants to take care of you and neither of us had a choice in the matter. So what do you say we try to cooperate and make this easier for both of us? He said monotonously. Naruto gaped at the shinobi in front of him. Fear crept into his heart. The ninja radiated a cold killer aura. The scar slashed across his eye grabbed Naruto's fascination and he looked on, horrified. The dots in the Sharingan eye swirled and drew him into their hypnotic depths, making him relieve the traumatic incident that had placed him in Kakashi's care. Kakashi was oblivious to all of this. His only intention was to make things clear to the boy, not scare him. Besides kid, what gave you the idea I'm your nanny? I'm your guardian, but it's not like I had a choice. I don't want to take care of you. He coolly delivered the words. Naruto made a small noise that sounded like what his youngest nin dog had when its parent had been killed in battle. Kakashi belatedly realized that he was talking to a 6-year-old. The child in question also had, as he had noted earlier, trust issues. Shit. So much for being non-threatening, Hitaki, an insidious voice whispered inside his head. You've probably just scared him for life. Way to go. First mission since you quit the Anbu and you've failed it in 4 hours, maybe you should have just stuck to killing people. It's more your style, isn't it? The voice continued. Guilt tore through him at that and he welcomed it. Still, one could suppose it was not really his fault. Most kids had had normal childhoods. They'd had parents to shelter them, teach them and comfort them. They had friends to play with, to tease and to brawl with in the playground. Kakashi's only parent, that is, the one he could remember, had been a vegetable who had depended on him for survival. It had broken his heart, and hardened any softness his 7-year-old Chunin self might have possessed, to see the once tall and proud Hitaki Sakumo become an emotionally crippled psycho who had often tried to kill his only son. Thankfully, the legendary White Fang's skills had fled along with his wits. Still, Kakashi reflected as he massaged an old scar on his left forearm, there had been a few lucky misses. Like the time he had awoken to find his father looming over his bed with a kitchen knife. He had been mumbling something about killing stone nins. Why he had thought his own son was an enemy nin was something not even Kami-sama knew, of that Kakashi was sure. Then again, he had come home from a mission involving spying on stone activities, and the Hitaki clan was famous for their tracking skills. Oh well, I guess that's just something else I'll have to ask Dad when I see him. As for friends, he had never had them. Most kids had had plenty of friends. But he, as already established, had always been a loner. His only constant companions had been shame, guilt and regret, along with a father who had been haunted by those three as well. And speaking of a normal childhood, that was impossible in Kakashi's case. He'd never had a childhood. Thus, given the circumstances, one should forgive Kakashi for his actions. He knew, of course, in theory, that 6-year-olds were children. And children, the psychology textbook had said, were to be treated gently as any sort of violence could harm their fragile psyche, and leave a lasting imprint. The only children he had ever faced were the dangerous sort. He'd even seen a few and heard of a few who enjoyed the taste of blood and who treated killing as a game, very much like the demon of Mist Village, once upon a time. Are you any different? The voice whispered again. Kakashi added a visit to the local psychiatrist to his mental list. Voices in his head were a sure sign he was crossing the line between the normal level of insanity and a more dangerous one. Another whimper shook him out of his thoughts. Naruto was staring at him wide-eyed now. His blue eyes were fixed on Kakashi's Sharingan in shock and he was biting his lower lip fiercely. Kakashi reached out without thinking and the boy flinched and skittered backwards, his chest heaving. Tears streaked his cheeks as he stared on ahead blankly. They closed in around him, laughing all the while. The smell of sake on their breaths made his head reel and his stomach rebelled. What do you want? He demanded loudly, his fear making him brash. Feisty, is he? The first man said. Well, we'll just have to teach him who's in charge here, won't we? Another commented with a laugh. So how shall we start? His fingers perhaps, we should make it so he can't bend them anymore. Naruto shivered at their taunts, blinking back tears that threatened to spill. What did they want? They never told him why. And that hurt more than the beatings and the heated glares. Why? Just tell me why, he pleaded. Because you don't belong here, Bakemono. Nobody wants you. We don't want you here. Get it? He clenched his fists at that. The action only caused the inebriated men to roar with laughter again. Boy, have you heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Naruto shook his head numbly. His nanny had never told him stories. She just arrived in the morning to make him ramen and spent the rest of the day on the telephone. The nannies had been nicer once, when he was younger. The old man Hokage had visited him more too. Now that he was in school though, they mostly left him to his own devices. Still, it hurt. And no one ever told him why. A man's menacing voice interrupted his thoughts. So you don't know the story, do you? Came the question again. No, he replied defiantly. Oh ho, seems like this little demon's not scared yet. Perhaps it is time we stopped playing around, guys. The others drew closer at that. I shall first break your fingers, all the better to hear you scream. The first man drew closer and closer until he stood right beside Naruto. Naruto peered at the night sky, looking for a way to escape. But there was no rooftop to leap onto, no friendly tree branch to aid his escape. He would have to face them. Naruto hunched his shoulders and glared at the man nearest to him. Why look at the filthy little brat glaring at me? I'm shaking, guys. It is time, the last man said. He was different from the rest. They were all drunk and staggered slightly, their eyes glazed over. This man though, he sent chills down Naruto's back, and he stood straight and tall. His face was cloaked by shadows but his voice was firm and sober. The red eyes Naruto glimpsed held a delighted manic gleam in them. The drunkards moved forward, crude clubs raised. As the first blow descended, all Naruto's eyes saw were those red orbs that held his attention and seemed to drown him. Pain exploded as another. Kakashi shook the boy furiously. He was breathing shallowly now, his tiny chest heaving furiously as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His eyes, though, they looked terrified, but they weren't focused on him any longer. Kakashi grabbed the boy again, shaking him hard enough to snap him out of it. Naruto came to violently, his blue eyes glancing all around. The boy looked at the Sharingan again and started trembling wildly. He acted fast this time, grabbing the Hittite off the table and covering his scarred eye with it. The boy calmed down visibly, proving that the Sharingan was what had triggered him off. Kakashi sagged with relief at that. At least it wasn't anything he could help that had set the boy off. Anything he could help much, that is, he thought, reflecting back on his words guiltily. Something he had said had caused the boy to freeze and relive a traumatic memory. Kakashi was fairly certain that memory was linked to the scars he had glimpsed earlier today. After all, from the files Sandaime had given him, the boy was usually cheerful. Too cheerful, as evidenced by his previous behavior. To see a child so full of life over ramen of all things, just moments ago reduced to the shivering wreck on his table, was disturbing. It was just wrong. He reached out to the boy again, meaning to get him to snap out of it. Naruto scrambled backwards again at Kakashi's touch. He was scared. Kakashi restrained a sigh and bent down. "I'm just trying to help," he tried convincing the boy. He got no response. Kakashi closed his eyes for a moment. "Help me, sensei." The memory that came to his aid was not that of sun-kissed blonde hair and kind blue eyes. Instead, the warm brown eyes and red hair, like father, like son. Naruto likes pink-haired Sakura, Yondaime liked red-haired Kie, of Uzumaki Kie filled his senses. He remembered her soft voice as she coaxed him down the tree after his first assassination. "It's all right, Kashi-kun. It's all right," she'd said as he had sobbed in her arms. It had been one of the few times he'd actually allowed himself to let go. She had been one of the few he had trusted enough to drop all pretenses in front of. But she was dead, and her son needed him. Kakashi took a breath as he dropped to his knees again. He winced as the spilled ramen soup soaked his only good pair of sweats. Still, it was easy to wash clothing, much easier than, say, comforting a scared little boy. He summoned the memory of her voice again. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly to the boy, his visible eye dark with emotion. Naruto, surprisingly, responded to the tone. "But you said, he stuttered fearfully. You said you didn't want me." The plaintive cry sprang from the boy's lips. Kakashi frowned. He did not like this lack of information. In any mission, the most important thing was intelligence. If you had none beforehand, you went out, did some recon, and got it yourself, before the mission. But that was a matter to be pondered on later. He forced himself to focus on the boy and his ramen-soaked clothes. "Ah, but I never said I would hurt you, right?" Naruto shook his head dumbly before pausing as he processed the question. He then began to nod his head, before changing his mind again. Kakashi couldn't help cracking a smile at the boy's antics. Naruto relaxed at the smile, to Kakashi's surprise. So a smile goes far, He filed that information away in his mind. "Naruto, why are you scared?" Kakashi winced inwardly at his flat tone. He sounded like a bad imitation of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator. Sorry, I couldn't resist adding that one in, No answer again. A cold draft blew through the window and Naruto shivered, out of cold this time. He had to get the kid into drier clothing, fast. "What scared you, just now?" Still no reply. "Nay, Naruto, what is it?" "Maybe it was the ramen, huh? You don't like my ramen, is that it?" "My ramen is not good enough for you." Sheer desperation made Kakashi babble. Naruto cracked a small smile as he shook his head furiously. "Yeah, I like any kind of ramen. Especially, miso ramen." "Ah, so I was right. He is a ramen fanatic." Kakashi pressed the opening. That what was wrong? Naruto became subdued again immediately. "Well, if you really don't want to tell. Sensei, Your eye, the boy trailed off, his voice disappearing. Bingo. Kakashi loved being right. He loved being able to put clues together. It was one of the reasons his favorite toy, at 4, had been a jigsaw puzzle. Ma, never mind, we shall leave that for another day, nay. He smiled again at the boy. Smiles were wonderful things. The morose boy actually grinned back at him, flashing a grin bright enough to rival one of Guy's. Kakashi shuddered at the thought that Naruto was anything like the green jumpsuit-clad taijutsu expert. It was scary. He did have to live with the kid after all. Still, there were startling similarities. Like their loudness and their preference for bright colors, Naruto's shirt was orange today, as was his bag. Kakashi had a sneaking suspicion, the horror of it, that Naruto liked orange. Shudder. Then again, the kid was young. And he, as Naruto's sensei, would be obligated to influence the child's color choice, not that his sensei had ever gotten him to wear something that wasn't blue-black. Yes, there would be time for that later. Just as soon as he cleaned up the living room, Naruto had somehow spilled both cups, one of them Kakashi's, still full of noodles, and got Naruto dressed, and then got to the root of the kid's problem with a visit to Sandaime. If he had it his way, a certain group of retired shinobi within the village who liked to get drunk in the evenings would be getting a visit from him as well. Oh well, he did have the next few years with the boy. Yep, he had plenty of time for that. It was customary for a kage to be succeeded by his student or a student's student. But the Sannin were scattered. Sannin Jiraiya's student, Yondaime, was dead, and Kakashi was Yondaime's only surviving student. As for the other Sannin, Tsunade had taken her sole pupil with her, and Orochimaru had deserted with all of his, leaving only Mitarashi Anko behind. He knew her well. She was friends with the cat. He fled from that thought. He did not need to be thinking about swords and blood on the morning after he had just returned from his reintroduction to both. It had nearly the final time he had to face both. And isn't that what you yearn for? It was true. All he wanted was. A whimper broke that chain of thought as well. Kakashi was, at that moment, very glad for Naruto's presence. He walked over to the boy. Naruto was rolling in his sheets, gasping soundlessly. Drops of sweat ran down his forehead and had already drenched his blonde hair. Pain. It hurt so much. Why? Why were they doing this? Was he really so evil? What he ever done? A voice pierced his thoughts. Yes, little monster. You are evil incarnate. You are worse than the Grim Reaper himself. You don't deserve life. No one wants you. No one cares. The voice screamed at him. He was plunged into a maelstrom of memories. Everywhere he looked, people were screaming and throwing things at him. The worst, though, were the glares. Poisonous, hate-filled glares that shook him to the core and promised things he could not begin to imagine at. Stop. He wanted to scream, but he could not. The words refused to leave his mouth. Something was squeezing his chest and everything was red and black. He tried to shout for help or say anything at all. But he couldn't. He wanted to cry, but he had not the strength. He opened his mouth in desperation. He had to. Kakashi knew it was bad when Naruto started thrashing and gulping at the air. The boy had never done this before. He grabbed his Hitai-8 from the bedstand and put it on to cover the Sharingan. He reached over and shook the boy awake. Naruto came to, gasping for his very life. He looked around in panic, adrenaline pumping through his system and narrowing his focus. He tried to untangle himself from the blankets in his mind. They were ropes tied to hold him down, and sobbed in frustration when he couldn't. Kakashi reached out gently and placed a firm arm on Naruto's shoulder. The boy jumped at that. He stared wildly at Kakashi, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Blue eyes glared into a single black one for a long moment. It was a nightmare, Kakashi said at last, slightly unnerved at the ferocity of the boy's gaze. He had stared down cold-blooded maniacs before without flinching, but this boy, his eyes had been so feral, like a cornered wild beast. Perhaps the Kyuubi was still in there. No, he refused to pursue the thought. Naruto was Naruto. He was a 6-year-old boy, nothing more, nothing less. He might be the Kyuubi no Kitsune's container. But he was still Naruto. Besides, Kakashi seriously doubted that any Yukai would gulp down ramen the way the kid did. Just a nightmare, it was so real. There, you idiot. See, he's just a small boy. Oh really? And how do you know? Experts on Yukai all of a sudden are we. Kakashi firmly ignored the voices in his head and headed to the kitchen. He uncapped the warm water he kept in a flask for such occasions and poured a cup. Here, it'll help clear your head, he offered the cup to the boy. Naruto silently accepted it and drank the water. He drained it and gave it back to the Junin, who wordlessly returned it to the kitchenette's shelf. So, want to talk about it? Naruto shook his head. Cat got your tongue. Why are you so concerned? Naruto asked petulantly. Kakashi didn't reply this time. They stood in silence, both of them looking everywhere but the other. Naruto finally turned his gaze to Kakashi, and gasped. Kakashi frowned at that. He had made sure both his mask and forehead protector were secured before he woke the boy up. You're bleeding. Kakashi's eyes widened. Ah, well you shouldn't shout, you know. You'll wake up the neighbors. But you're hurt. Ma, I know that, Naruto-kun. But it's just a scratch. I'll go clean it up now, okay? He smiled inwardly. The troublesome slash he'd received across his right shoulder had been worth something after all. It had taken the boy's mind off his dreams. He went to the cabinet in the kitchen and got out his rather extensive first aid kit. He had treated a multitude of his own wounds himself over the years, and this was nothing. His first aid kit was of course due to Rin's influence. She had always forced Obito, himself and even Sensei, into stocking up on medical supplies. He reached down to open the box and winced as his shoulder twinged in response to the action. Naruto reached Son immediately. Here, I'll do it. The medic nin at the hospital taught me to dress my own wounds. Naruto got out the roll of gauze, sticky tape and scissors, as well as the alcohol dabs with the air of one who was accustomed to such things. Kakashi watched bemusedly as the boy measured the gauze out and cut it with the cautiousness of a 6-year-old. The boy held the gauze up when he was down before he realized he had to put it on Kakashi. Kakashi decided to humor the kid. He stood up and disassembled his body armor before pulling his shirt off. A stab of pain ran down his arm at that. Damn, he really had to get that looked at tomorrow. He sat down in front of the kid and waited. Naruto took the unspoken cue to begin. He used the swabs to meticulously and gently soak up the blood and clean the long gash. His soft touches gave Kakashi an odd sense of deja vu. He could almost hear Rin chiding Obito for being careless as she cleaned his wounds. Naruto was wrapping the shoulder by now. He finished and tried to hold the bandage in place while he, unsuccessfully, tried to cut a piece of medical tape at the same time. Kakashi felt a grin tug his mouth at the boy's humorous attempts. At last, he reached out a hand to hold the bandage in place. Naruto looked up at him, seemingly having forgotten about his patient. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at him and the kid blushed. He yawned as he cut the tape and plastered it on. Well, I suppose it's time for you to go back to bed. But it's already morning, Naruto said in between two humongous yawns. Kakashi shook his head. Naruto pouted. He picked the boy up and deposited him on the small futon before the kid could protest. He turned to leave, envisioning a long soak to soothe his now aching shoulder. A tiny tug stopped him. Can I don't wanna sleep alone, the words tumble out of the boy's mouth as he studied the ground. Kakashi considered saying no. He looked at the blonde kid and memories flooded him of waking up screaming to empty silence and the drunken groans of a broken man. He had a chance to make a difference. The bath could wait. He picked the kids' bedding up and put them down across the hall, beside his own futon. Kakashi awoke with a suppressed groan. Not again. Naruto was having a nightmare for the 7th time in as many days. It was worrying and frustrating because he could do nothing for the boy. He padded his way across the small apartment to Naruto's futon. The small form that was entangled in the sheets emitted sounds of distress as it struggled against invisible bonds. Kakashi shook the boy awake. Nightmare? He asked the still quavering boy. Naruto simply nodded. He did not trust his voice. Water. Kakashi made the customary offer. The child nodded again, sending Kakashi toward the kitchenette. He got Naruto's usual cup of water, all the while keeping an eye on the shivering boy. Naruto drew his blankets around him despite the humid night and shivered. Kakashi handed him the cup and gestured at the boy to be careful. A cup had been broken this morning. Want to talk about it? He queried softly, already knowing the answer to his question. The boy gazed at the floor. Kakashi took his silence as dissent. He expelled a breath in frustration before gathering up the boy's blankets and heading across the room. He didn't have to look to know Naruto was behind him. This had become a nightly ritual for the past week. Naruto always slept across the hall, but ended up sleeping with Kakashi by dawn. The Junin had long since resigned himself to it. Frankly, he was surprised that he seemed to be able to keep Naruto's demons away. The boy had been skittish around him ever since the first day, and what the latter had termed the ramen incident. Sorry. A soft voice made Kakashi turn around. I'm sorry, for all the trouble, Naruto said. It's nothing, Naruto-kun. Besides, you're not the only one to have ever had trouble sleeping, you know. I know plenty of shinobi who have nightmares. It's an occupational hazard, he babbled, unsure of what the right words were in such a situation. But, I bet you never had a nightmare before, the boy said bitterly. Kakashi stopped in his tracks and turned around so suddenly that Naruto recoiled at the motion. I know what it's like, believe me, he replied softly. Something about his tone must have convinced the kid. Naruto didn't say another word. Kakashi spread the blankets out, scooted over to one side and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would visit the Hokage. He'd managed to put off the meeting for so long because Naruto had been confined to the house on the psychologist's recommendation and Kakashi was to be around him during the day at least. If he didn't solve the puzzling mystery of Naruto and his illogical fear of the Sharingan, Kakashi figured he would be the one needing counseling. He would just have to figure something out tomorrow. He was a genius after all. Interlude. Dawn overtook the hidden village of the Leaf. The first rays of sunlight awoke many of the sleeping shinobi and the joyous cacophony created by the morning calls of birds disturbed the slumber of many others. The shinobi gate guard changed shift in the morning mist and Uchiha Ryuga started his journey home. His tired mind drifted for a second to the boy he had rescued more than a week ago. All coherent thoughts were dispersed as he yawned. He stumbled to his apartment upon reaching the outskirts of the Uchiha complex. His family was not deemed respectable because his father had not married within the clan, as custom dictated he should. As the son of such a reunion, Ryuga was scorned by much of his own clan. His Chunin status at the age of 21 and his average performance were an oddity in a clan so renowned for producing geniuses. Oh well, to each his own. He kicked open the stubborn door and entered the cramped apartment. Soiled clothes lay in a basket on one side of a washing machine and clothing was drying above it. Beside the machine was a tiny stove and in front of it was a table, which served multiple purposes. To the left of the table was his only luxury, a boom box. He switched it on and let the music wash over him. Ryuga entered the toilet and shed his sweat-stained clothes. Guard and patrol duty was a mind-numbing affair but it was also tiring. It required a shinobi to maintain a high level of alertness and awareness for long periods of time. Many a ninja had dozed off at the guard posts but Ryuga took the security and safety of the village very seriously. He might not have been one of the most illustrious or respected members of his clan but he was an Uchiha, and he had always remained true to his clan's precepts. The tub was full of warm water by now and he slid in, moaning in pleasure as the heated water unknotted his tight muscles. Sleep overcame him. Halfway across Konoha, another shinobi stirred. His clan had never been much to speak of and his late father had besmirched its name beyond redemption. As it was, this ninja was the only survivor of his clan. He was not very respectable either. He was, however, a genius. Had he been born in the former's clan, his life would likely have been different. But he was also sure it would have been much darker. Boy geniuses were prized and exploited by the Uchiha. His nightmares, for one, would have been bloodier and more horrifying than they already were. The genius shinobi was just awakening from aforementioned nightmares. Unlike his blonde charge, Kakashi had long mastered the ability to sleep silently. It was a very necessary, or rather extremely important, skill for a field shinobi. He jolted awake this time and tensed at a presence beside him. Memory flooded his drowsy mind and he relaxed. He looked down at the boy's face for a moment. In sleep, Naruto looked too young and too innocent to be having nightmares of his own. Naruto's face was presently unfurrowed, reflecting the deep, contented sleep of its owner. The boy had found comfort from his dreams in Kakashi's presence, but who would provide such a thing for the 19-year-old? Kakashi shrugged off the self-pitying question. Life, it often seemed, liked to laugh at the serious silver-haired Junin. Though in retrospect, he realized that he had not dreamt so vividly since the boy had come into his life. It did not bode well for the day ahead. Kakashi gently extricated himself from the futon and went to shower. He bathed, dressed, and came out, fastening his mask on. His Hittite was already secured. It had been the first article of clothing he donned. He tried to never take it off in front of Naruto, waiting until the boy was asleep to avail himself of the headband. He glanced over at the boy to be sure he was still sleeping. Now, how would he do this? He had to be in two places at once. It was going to be hard. The most obvious answer was a bunchen. But a bunchen would vanish the first time it knocked into something. A dog barked outside. Of course, his dogs. He summoned 3 of them immediately. Garashi, Karain and of course, Pakun. Pakun, I need you guys to do me a favor. See that kid sleeping over there? Look after him. The 3 canines nodded in unison. Pakun was needed for obvious reasons. He was the only one fluent in human speech. Karain was a tracker by nature, but that was not why he had chosen her. She was also a mother of 6 who had ample experience keeping younglings out of trouble. Garashi was her mate and a watchdog. He would provide the muscle necessary for this mission. I'll leave him in your hands. We'll be back around noon, he said, leaving before Pakun could complain. It was still early. Hopefully the Hokage would have a few free minutes. He jumped over rooftops rapidly, enjoying the physical activity. He had been cooped up in the house for too long with that S-rank mission, his only outing in days. Perhaps even a spar with Guy would be welcome today. Kakashi reached the strangely deserted Hokage Tower and headed toward the mission room. To his surprise, the mission room was completely packed with Junin. Kakashi spotted many recognizable faces. Ah, my eternal rival. You are early for once. How cool of you to be unexpected and arrive earlier than me. Speak of the devil. Guy had just arrived. Why was it that no one answered his serious wishes? Yosh, Konoha's beautiful green beast is here. And so is his eternal rival, the copy Nin. We can start now. Guy had somehow reached his side and put an arm around him. Thankfully, most of the veterans knew enough of Guy and his eccentrics to ignore him. The rookie Junin stared though, and Kakashi fought the urge to discard his nonchalant persona and run screaming into the forest. What are we early for? He asked, fixating his eye on Guy. How hip of my rival to pretend not to know. Oh, how irritating of you. Hokage-sama summoned us with a hawk, of course. I naturally spotted this at once. How cruel of my rival to assume I would not notice it. Tears were streaming down Guy's cheeks and Kakashi tactfully refrained from pointing out that Guy was far from the first to arrive. By now, everyone was staring. Kakashi discreetly slinked away from Guy as the green spandex-clad man ranted and wailed. That was cruel, you know, a voice said from behind him. He turned around and tensed at the familiar face. His eyes flicked to her neck. It was smooth and unscarred. Kazui, he nodded to the cat. She noticed the direction of his gaze. Most women would hit you for not looking at their faces, ya know. She drawled, enjoying his embarrassed duck of the head. Especially considering your infamous choice of reading material, she smirked at him. Once, he would have just grunted at her teasing ways, but now, he merely offered her a curved eye smile. You've changed, she said in a softer tone. Ah, but you're still a man of few words, I see. Ah, it's healed, he said, looking everywhere except her eyes and her white, unblemished neck. All things heal, Kakashi. It was never deep to begin with, her voice was serious. You shouldn't have left. Not because of that. No, a little more and, he trailed off and turned around, guilt surging through him. Unspoken was the admission that he nearly snapped. He had nearly become the very thing he detested in the world. What had Obito thought about his actions? He felt an arm gently grab his elbow. Kakashi, whatever she wanted to say was cut off by the Hokage's entry. Thank you all for responding. Follow me. Sandaime led them to one of the meeting rooms in the tower. He waited for the Junin to settle down before beginning. Konoha, as you all know, is at a state of relative peace right now. However, we are still recovering from the scars of the past decade and more. All of you here today grew up during that era and know the hardships of war. This knowledge has to be passed on to the younger generations. As such, I have called all of you here to discuss the matter of shinobi enrollment and training. Despite being at peace, I am sure you are aware that Konoha is not truly safe and that this situation can change at any time. Those summoned here today are all experienced Junins, the Hokage droned. Kakashi stared blankly at the wall. Why am I here again? Oh yeah, Naruto. Nightmares. Sharingan. Must find out. He contemplated dozing off. A sudden thought struck him. He turned to the side and faced the cat. You're a Junin. Since last week, she replied nonchalantly. I didn't know they were in dire need, he jibed. We aren't supposed to be talking during a meeting, she pointed out icily, stung by his teasing comment. He grunted at that and shut up. Fortunately, the meeting was over shortly. Most of the shinobi began filing out, but the Hokage remained deep in conversation with a few others. Kakashi ventured over to the group. The Hokage was talking to elite Junin Ebisu, an academy sensei by the name of Uehi Kurenai who had once been a squad mate, an older sensei whom he didn't recognize, and an elderly shinobi whose face seemed to tug at Kakashi's memory. Then I'll leave it to the five of you, Sandaime ended his speech. Kakashi held back a sigh of relief. He hated waiting. Yes, Hokage-sama, they chorused. Kakashi nodded to them as they passed him. Kakashi-senpai, that was Kurenai. Uehi-san, Kakashi, Ebisu. The unfamiliar sensei inclined his head as he walked by and Kakashi returned the gesture. The last man stepped forward and surveyed Kakashi. Those eyes, something about them was so familiar. Suddenly the other man grinned. Kakashi-kun. It's been years. Kakashi-kun. Who the hell did he? It was his academy sensei. Sensei. He nodded respectfully to the man. They might be equals now, but the man still deserved his respect. Oh come now, I don't deserve that title. You were under my tutelage for less than a year. We all know you only had one sensei, the older man remarked with a wry smile. Ah, Kakashi replied, swallowing hard to dissolve the sudden lump in his throat. Yondaime, I heard you have taken on a student. How is it? I am not teaching him. Oh, it's complicated, he fidgeted. He was really the boy's guardian rather than his tutor. Well, I'll see you around. Kakashi, I was not expecting you today. Pakun is with the boy, he said flatly. Of course. Shall we move this to my office? The Hokage strode off without waiting for a reply, or even an acknowledgement. Kakashi fumed silently as he followed. Seriously, the old man seemed to order him around all the time. What's wrong with me today? He's the Hokage for crying out aloud, you idiot. Of course he orders you around. Kakashi arrived in front of the Hokage's desk and looked up at the pictures. A familiar ache started in his chest as he remembered how the place had once looked like. He ruthlessly suppressed it. The past would have to wait for the present. Hokage-sama, what exactly happened to him? He got straight to the matter. He was in no mood for pleasantries after that lecture. Sandame looked at Kakashi. He studied the man, surprised at the anger and protectiveness in Kakashi's voice. He resisted the urge to smile. Sometimes, he could see glimpses of Tsukumo in the boy. He was beaten up by a group of retired drunks. You already know that, yes. But he was thoroughly shaken at the sight of my Sharingan. He seemed to recognize it and knew to be afraid of it. I do not have an explanation for you, Kakashi. But a Chunin, by the name of Uchiha Ryuga, was the one who found him. He did something to the boy. Kakashi was surprised at the sudden surge of rage that hammered through his veins. On the contrary, Ryuga was the one who rescued him from certain death. But Hokage-sama, there has to be a reason behind his fear of the Sharingan. He resisted the urge to shout. For not the first time in 8 days, Hitaki Kakashi wondered if Naruto possessed some sort of strange power over him. What is it about the boy that makes me want to protect him so badly? Perhaps, it was just misplaced guilt and affection. The boy bore an uncanny resemblance to both his sensei and Obito. But no, it was something else. In just over a week, the child had turned his life upside down. This was the first time he had not visited Obito while he was in Konoha. Even injured badly and strapped to a hospital bed, Kakashi had managed to devise a way to get to the monument. An irrational part of him resented the intrusion into his life. He had lived in solitude for so long. And his habits, born out of circumstance, had eventually become his nature. In just days, Naruto had changed the routine. Kakashi had been living for more years than Naruto had been alive. It was upsetting. Kakashi was a man of contradictions. Based on his loyalty to Konoha and his sacrificial nature, one might say he was a good man. But in his eyes, he was far from that. He was cold, exacting and always aloof, estranged from the rest. Yes, he protected people. That was a lesson he had learnt painfully, and he drew his strength and his very identity from it. But he had no idea how to let others protect him, and there were very few who tried anymore. Most of his comrades feared him, many shunned him, and very few could say they knew him. Ryuga told me the boy was unconscious, presumably from blood loss and shock, when he rescued him. The boy remained comatose for 2 days, even after the Kyuubi healed him. The medics detected signs of unusual brain activity for a patient in a coma. You suspect an Uchiha had something to do with it. I suspect nothing except that the boy was placed under genjutsu of some sort. A Hokage had to be impartial, even when it went against all his beliefs and ideals. When one became Hokage, all sense of self was thrown away and the cage became the village. That was why the Yondaime had been able to selflessly act in the interest of the village, without sparing a thought to the impact his actions would have on his family. Also, one could not simply accuse the entire Uchiha clan, they were one of the pillars of Konoha. But, Hokage-sama, surely an investigation. Kakashi trailed off as he realized the futility of the situation. I suspect nothing, Hitaki-san. Your duty is to protect Naruto until he can protect himself. Others will find out what happened that night, the Hokage said sternly. But he let his brown eyes betray his true feelings. Look underneath the underneath. Kakashi watched the boy writing. The past 3 weeks had been tough on the two of them, but it had been enlightening. He had not spent so much time in close proximity to anyone aside from his frequent missions. It was amazing, really, that he had not blown up, killed the kid, killed anyone else, or killed himself in that time. You're going soft. That voice in his head cackled gleefully. Kakashi mentally rolled his eyes at it. He was not going soft. He was just. A sudden crash startled him. Kakashi whirled around to see that one of the puppies had just knocked over a pile of scrolls that he had been using to teach Naruto. The puppy looked up at him and yipped before licking his face vigorously as he picked it up. It got a mouthful of his mask instead. Kakashi watched on, amused as the pup wrinkled its nose and sneezed. Karain arrived on its heels and barked at the young nin dog. It whined and wriggled into Kakashi's arms. He scratched behind its ears, as he avoided the death glares Karain sent his way for spoiling her pup. A few seconds later, 2 more balls of energy bounded into the room, followed closely by Garashi. Naruto yelped as one of them knocked over his pot of ink in its enthusiastic attempts at giving him a tongue bath. The other zoomed around the house, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Thankfully, his apartment was puppy-proof after having endured generations of Ninken an. I think Ninken means nin dogs in Japanese, not sure though, so someone please tell me if I'm wrong. Kakashi found himself grinning widely under his mask at the havoc they created. Yep, there was no doubt about it, he was going soft. It's a sign you're growing old. Losing our touch, are we? Stuck here, babysitting. Bah, that's a D rank mission, C rank at best because you're doing bodyguard duty too. What would? Kakashi refused to listen to the voice any longer. I thought you brought them out to train. He asked Karain. She grinned at him toothily. He shook his head in mock disappointment at her. She nudged his leg and proffered a whistle to him. He took it from her mouth and blew it twice. The sound produced was inaudible to the human ear, but the dog stood at attention immediately. Karain looked at him proudly. She and Garashi had succeeded in teaching the puppies the first of many commands needed. Eventually, they would be able to communicate with him mentally, but learning to obey the whistle was the first step. The dogs in Naruto were looking at him expectantly, even Garashi and Karain who knew what was coming next. Kakashi smiled inwardly and beckoned the kid over. He handed him the whistle. Blow once and point in one direction, they'll move. Blow twice again and they'll stop, he whispered in the boy's ears. Naruto took it with trembling hands. Kakashi watched intently as the boy blew the whistle once. The dogs moved as one to the left. Naruto glanced up at Kakashi who smiled at him encouragingly. He wanted the boy to learn how to work with the dogs, it was for his own safety. Kakashi was after all, a practical person. Despite his seeming aloofness from life and all the mundane things that came with it, he was very much grounded in reality. Naruto was in danger. As with any extremely successful shinobi who had been around for a while, he had his fair share of people out for his neck. Glory seekers, assassins, angry avengers, you name them, he'd seen them. He was, of course, sympathetic to the wrong bereaved relatives and friends who wanted revenge. But it simply wasn't in his nature to roll over and die simply because they wanted him to. Then again, if he'd killed them, it could only mean that they were a shinobi, or a civilian who had gotten caught up in shinobi business. If the person who he had killed was a ninja, then the grieving loved ones had no business coming after him. Death was a ninja's closest companion. Of course, that didn't stop him from wanting to kill the bastard who had killed Rin, but that was another story. Thus, by simple association alone, Naruto would be a target from such people. And if that wasn't enough, the kid had dangerous problems of his own. He only had an entire village out for his blood, thinking that he was the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Naruto happened to live in that village too. It was up to Kakashi to teach him how to protect himself and to protect him until he was able to do so. He watched the kid go through the motions a few more times, mentally heaving a sigh of relief. Nin dogs were normally picky, they wouldn't obey anyone unless they were summoned by that someone. It was also very hard to obtain their summons, though they were one of the most loyal summons. Thus, Kakashi had not been sure if the dogs would respond to Naruto, and that would have put a serious kink in his plans. But he trusted his guts and picked up on tiny cues from the dogs, and it had worked out. He placed a hand on the blonde's shoulder and gestured at Karain and Garashi. They disappeared immediately with the pups. It had been a long day for all of them. Tired? He asked Naruto. The child shook his head energetically. Kakashi smiled at the boy again, glad to see Naruto perking up finally. He remembered what the psychiatrist had told him after last week's session. Naruto-kun, I have some good news for you, he said, injecting forced cheerfulness into his voice. Naruto looked up. I can go outside on my own? He asked hopefully. Well, Not on your own yet. But it's something close to that. Arain-san has agreed to let you return to school finally. Oh, the boy's face fell unexpectedly. Kakashi frowned and squatted down to eye level. It was habit for him to do that when Naruto was reticent. It made it easier for him to read the boy. As a Junin, he was normally very good at reading people effortlessly. It was just something he could do. Naruto, though, was different. He seemed extroverted, but in reality he was anything but. His evasion tactics were as good as any ANBU's really. You don't like school very much. Hokage-sama told me you liked school. Kakashi's frown grew deeper. Hi, I do. It's just that I like it here better than at home. And, I'll miss the dogs. Kakashi caught the silent implication that he would be missed as well. Underneath, he smiled gently this time. Nay, Naruto. This is your home now, he said gently. And while the puppies will miss you at your afternoon training sessions, you do need to get an education. Besides, I presume you still want to be a shinobi. Of course, old man. I thought you said I was too young. Yeah, but you're still much older than me, Naruto said impishly. Kakashi raised a bemused eyebrow at him. He had learned not to be so touchy about his age. He looked out a window and caught sight of the setting afternoon sun. Ah, it's dinner time. Get dressed, Naruto. We're going out for dinner, to celebrate your return to school. Yosh, let's go eat ramen. Kakashi made a face at that. Nay, Naruto, don't you get sick of eating ramen all the time? Of course not. Well, I do. And seeing as how I'm paying, Naruto's shoulders slumped in defeat, he stuck his tongue out at Kakashi. Alright, old man. So long as we aren't having disgusting eggplant soup again. His eyebrow twitched at that. Maybe he wasn't as nonchalant about his age as he thought. As for his eating habits, they weren't very compatible with Naruto's. The kid had taken a sip of eggplant soup and spewed it all over the table his first night here. Odd, he remembered slurping up every last bit his mother had made when he was as young as 3. A hand tugging at his pants brought him back to the present. Can we go now? I'm hungry, Naruto said plaintively, his big blue eyes begging Kakashi. The Junin took his hand and they stepped out. Kakashi wondered where he should bring the kid. He finally decided on going to get some okonomiyaki and sushi at a nearby cafe. It was a tiny thing tucked away in a corner of a section of Konoha that was less frequented by shinobi. Most of the patrons were civilians, but he knew the owner well enough for it not to matter. He walked toward a fork in the road before he realized that he couldn't hear Naruto's soft shuffle anymore. He whirled around and caught sight of Naruto standing stock still in an elderly woman's grip. What were you thinking about? Staring at my house like that? We don't want the likes of you here, ya hear me? Get away, monster. It's bad enough that they let you live here, she hollered. Anyo sa, Gomen. I was just. She never gave him a chance to finish. The old woman pushed him to the ground and raised her cane to thwack him on the head. Naruto cringed back in expectation of a blow that never came. Kakashi was standing in front of Naruto, his arms crossed, slouching lazily. The old woman though was quaking in her shoes at the menacing aura that radiated off him. Is there a problem here? Shinobi-san. I was just telling this trash to clear off, she said, bowing to him respectfully. Kakashi could feel bile rising in his throat at her deference to him. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his famed control. When Kakashi got mad, it was usually a cold icy rage. This time though, he could feel blood pounding in his ears, and the sudden fierce urge to just reach out and shake the woman grabbed him. He would have done it if that would make her see reason. Unfortunately, he knew her ilk, and appealing to logic was impossible when faced with them. So he took another breath. This child, Kakashi bit out each word, is under my protection. Hit him, and you give me reason to hurt you. Hi, the woman stuttered before fleeing back to the safety of her house. Run, run, but you cannot hide. He suppressed the psychopathic desire to go after her. Of course, The voice was telling the truth. If he really wanted to, it would be ridiculously easy for him to kill her. Just one swift slash across her throat. Lovely warm blood splattering out. He watched the woman walk away with disgust. Was this what his sensei, Rin and Obito had given their lives for? Was this what he had lost countless of comrades and his entire family for? He protected the village, and in doing so, he risked his life for people like that old woman, and like those who had beaten an innocent child up. It made him question himself and his entire life. He looked down at the quivering, blank-eyed kid behind him. He knew the boy was reliving the horrifying incident that had occurred a month ago. He sighed softly. Today had been going so well too. He picked up the boy and put him on his shoulders, before leaping off toward the apartment. His own crisis of faith could be dealt with later. Once there, he summoned Pakun. Stay with him, he said. Pakun was already licking the boy comfortingly. He yipped at Naruto's limp hand, trying to get him to stroke them. Kakashi flashed back to earlier that day when Naruto had been rolling around with the puppies. The difference between now and then was heartbreaking. He had been doing so well, and that old hag had destroyed everything with just a few careless words. He rubbed his forehead wearily. Food. They needed food. He stepped out into the chilly night and decided to pick up some meat for Karain and her pups. Then he stood there for a while, bag of meat in hand, unsure of what to do now. He looked up at the night sky. The moon was full, much like it had been when his sensei had died. Fire. Fire burned so bright. The terrifying demonic aura of the snarling demon threatened to overwhelm him. How could any creature be so evil? It shook him to the core, that any creature could be so malicious, so whimsical as to want to destroy an entire village for the fun of it. But in Yondaime, the kitsune had met its match. And the young wolf took comfort in the thought. He began forming seals again, flying to the aid of his fellow Anbu who were standing there, stunned into despair. They had to distract the fox while Yondaime readied the jutsu. The creature roared and knocked a few Anbu away like a tiger swiping at tiny mice. Suiden. Suiryuden no jutsu, he yelled. He was taking a gamble here. Water. Against fire, it was worth a chance. The column of liquid hurtled toward the Kyuubi, only to hit it with a loud hiss. The Kyuubi was a firefox. Water was an annoyance more than anything else. It roared again, louder this time. Shit. Okay, think. Water doesn't work against fire. What about grass? No. Burn too easily. Air. No, it wouldn't work. Stone. He would use stone. He knew many stone village kinjutsus. Stone was impenetrable. Fire burned everything to crisp. But he had seen many a stone nin defend against fire jutsus before. He risked a look back at the others. There were only 2 left out of the 3 squads that had protecting the Hokage. He had to try. He formed the seals quickly and quietly as the monster advanced. Huge stone balls bounded toward the Kyuubi. It screamed in rage and smashed them with its fiery tails. Suddenly its gruesome face loomed near. The heat was terrifying and his heart flailed. He caught sight of the Anbu making special signs. He had had little time to study them before. It was his first day on the job. But he knew this one. Retreat. He shook his head and pointed at his sensei. The owl looked back and spotted the child. The wolfie signed furiously in standard sign language. Jutsu. We have to stall. Hokage's orders. The owl eyed him before it nodded. They had a job to do. It signed back in normal sign language. Coordinate jutsus. Stone and water. You do stone. The rest of us will focus on water. Alternate them. Kakashi nodded his assent. The Kyuubi screamed again and moved forward. The young Anbu took a deep breath. No time like the present to start. He started another jutsu. Huge stone golems appeared and advanced toward the Kyuubi. It lashed out with a tail and knocked one of them over. The others took this opportunity to bombard it with water jutsus of every type. But there was only so much they could do without a lake in sight. The Kyuubi leapt forward, disregarding puny humans. It brought out its claws and lashed outward again. The wolf watched hopelessly as it swept all the other Anbu into the air. The owl, though, was still on the ground. Kakashi's eyes darted furiously as his genius mind worked. He had to do something. He'd promised Obito and Rin. He impulsively leapt forward, creating a large ball of white chakra in his hand. The unfamiliar chakra distracted the Kyuubi's attention and it veered, changing direction with a rapidity that caught the wolf off guard. He froze for an instant at the menacing sight before his training kicked in and he threw himself out of the way. It screamed again as a clawed hand reached out to swipe at him. The wolf jumped again, barely avoiding the blow. The monster charged again, stretching its horrible visage in a gruesome imitation of a grin, and the wolf shuddered as he realized that the Kyuubi was toying with him. He could feel weariness catching up with him as he performed another jutsu. He barely had any chakra left. Suddenly, the Kyuubi disappeared from view. The only warning he had was a whisper of air above him. He vaulted out of the way of what resembled a meteor shower. His foot caught on a tree root and he flew to the ground at an amazing rate as flaming rocks descended and pinned him to the ground as they seared his pale flesh. Little human. So tiny. So young. So pesky. Wonder how you taste, the demon chuckled. One of its tails sped through the air with inhuman speed. Kakashi closed his eyes and waited. The end was here. So be it. It wasn't that he wanted to die. He just didn't want to live either. Still, he couldn't feel as though he had failed Obito. The strike never came. A large toad, Gamabunta, jumped out, spraying a stream of fiery oil into the air. The Kyuubi shrieked and wheeled away. Gamabunta followed, its strong legs easily pacing the bigger creature. As the toad boss disappeared from view, Kakashi caught sight of a tall, yellow-haired figure clad in a white coat with flames adorning the bottom atop it. Sensei. He thrashed under the weight of the rocks, desperate to get up, knowing fully well that Kazuma Arashi would need a distraction while he sealed the creature. His efforts were futile, the rocks were too heavy and he had little chakra left. Still, he had to get out. He heaved his arm out off a jagged rock, wincing as it tore a long deep line across his arm. He concentrated on building his chakra. Chidori. The jutsu demolished the rocks in instants. He struggled to his feet and regretted it an instant later as his back met with the hard, scorched floor. He gazed up at the sky. It was a full moon. Full moons were said to drive people mad. Perhaps that was why the Kyuubi had attacked. The moon had caused an imbalance in its brain. The young wolf laughed hysterically. The ground beneath him had once been smooth and green. He used to train here with his brother when he was younger. Now all he could see was brown and red stained it. Everywhere around him lay the broken bodies of leaf shinobi. All dead, for what? The senseless actions of a beast. Were the lives of shinobi truly so meaningless that they lived and died at the whims of another? He clambered to his feet again, swaying desperately. Chakra overuse. He absent-mindedly diagnosed himself out of habit. He followed the trail. It was easy, really. The fox had left destruction in its wake. Broken trees and huge furrows peppered the landscape. His heart wrenched at the sight of the once lively forest. He stumbled on slowly. The path ended here. He looked around, but there was no sign of the Kyuubi anywhere. He stretched out his chakra sense. No sign of his sensei. A sudden flare of chakra startled him. He turned around swiftly to see Enma, Sandame's summon, holding a bundle in his arms. He's done it then? He asked Sandame, knowing the old man was standing behind him. Ah, how he had the courage to leave the boy, I'll never know, Sarutobi sighed. The wolf glanced at him sharply. Sandame sounded tired, like an old man who had seen too much and lived too much. But he could not afford to give in to it now. With Yondaime gone, the village was leaderless. Their people were still healing from the recently concluded war. This would be the opportune time for some enemy to strike. Konoha needed Sandame's leadership now. Sandame glanced over to Kakashi as though sensing the boy's unease. He smiled softly and sadly. We will go on without him. Unspoken was the understanding that they would have to go on. There was no alternative. Kakashi's legs chose that moment to buckle under him. His last thought as he was plunged into darkness was that he had lost his last precious person. Raindrops pelted him and drew him back to the present. What to buy? Ramen. He grinned at that. If there was one thing Naruto had definitely inherited from his father, it was his unnatural fondness for the salty noodles. He found his feet taking him to a well-lit ramen stand. It was Ichiraku's, and the owner was closing for the day. He stopped when he saw Kakashi and smiled. Late night, Hitaki-san. Ah, 2 bowls of miso ramen to go please. It had been so long time since he had frequented the stand. In the past, Sensei would often drag him and the other to the stand in the name of team bonding. He looked at the empty seats in the corner. He could almost see them now, Obito and Yondaime slurping up their ramen as fast as they could. Rin would be cheering Obito on, urging him to eat faster than Sensei. And he would be sitting a little away from them, his own ramen already finished, observing the trio furtively from the outside. Hitaki-san, here's your ramen. Ah, arigato. It's no problem. Haven't seen you here in a while. Not since. The older man trailed off. Gomen, I've been busy. I forgot how much I like the ramen here. So, you have company tonight? Huh, oh yes. How did you know? The chef smiled knowingly. 2 bowls. You ordered 2 bowls. I've never seen you eat more than one at a time. You've always only eaten one. Kakashi was surprised at how well the stand owner knew him. You would have made a good shinobi. Your observation skills are good. Iya, it's just that you've been coming here for so long. And Ayane used to. He stopped, fearing he'd said too much. Kakashi blushed under the mask, outwardly keeping his face impassive. Ayane was the shop owner's very pretty daughter. She was older than him by a year, and she used to have a bad crush on him. She's not here today. Yes. She's tending to her aunt. Tomoyo's pregnant with a 4th and she has 2 younglings. Kakashi nodded to the other man. Well, I'll be seeing you around then. Yane. Kakashi spent the journey home pondering on his sudden sociable behavior. He usually never said more than a few words, even when on mission. But Naruto chattered constantly, talking about everything and anything. His chattiness was usually a good indicator of his mood, and Kakashi had realized that a silent Naruto was a troubled one. So he had taken to engaging the boy, encouraging his questioning mind, and somehow the habit had carried over to other parts of his life. It was disturbing. He reached the apartment, nodded absent-mindedly to the boss-san at the ground level and got up the stairs, only to be waylaid by Guy. My eternal rival. It has been too long. Were you injured? No. This is too much. I wanted to be the first one to defeat you. Kakashi blinked. He refrained from pointing out the fact that Tsunade-sama had once flicked him on the head and sent him halfway across Konoha for being an impudent brat. And he was by no means invincible. Guy, excuse me, I have something to get to. Guy spotted the Ichiraku bag in Kakashi's hands. Ramen for dinner. We have similar tastes, my rival. Kakashi groaned and fidgeted. He wanted to check on Naruto. Let us have dinner together. I bought ramen as well. Guy held up his own bag, beaming at his friend. Kakashi considered the possibility and discarded it immediately. No, this is not a good time, he said dismissively, ignoring his guilty conscience. He had shared meals with the other in the past. Sadly, he also owed a great many favors, and not to mention his life, to Guy. The green spandex-clad Junin had helped him many times in the past when he had staggered home wounded and emotionally drained from an Anbu mission. The very presence of another human had been what had stopped him from sitting on his bed, bleeding to death, or even drowning himself in the bathtub. Guy's face fell, before breaking out into a scarily toothsome grin. You finally have a girlfriend. Kakashi somehow prevented his eyes from bugging out as he replied. No. Guy smiled again. Then what is the problem? Kakashi hesitated. True. Naruto was fragile right now. But the whole purpose of buying ramen for dinner was to cheer him up by distracting him with food. And Guy was a very good distraction. He turned to the other Junin. Guy, I need a favor, he said seriously. The other man's eyes widened before he nodded. Kakashi rarely asked for favors, and while Guy went around proclaiming that Kakashi was his eternal rival, the truth was far from that. One might call them friends, if men like Kakashi and Guy had friends, that is. What is it? He replied seriously. Kakashi was always surprised at the other man's transformation from wacky idiot to village Junin. He knew the other man was a good shinobi and the best taijutsu exponent in Konoha, which was saying a lot considering that Leaf hosted the Hyuga clan and their infamous Jiyukin style. But most times, Guy acted the fool. Most thought that that was Guy's true persona. Kakashi knew better. It was a mask. A front put up against the world. After all, anyone who knew shinobi could tell you that all Junin were crazy eccentric bastards. Guy was just more unique than most. So you had people like Kakashi, his chronic lateness and physical mask, Guy and his odd proclamations and spandex, Genma and Asuma and their respective oral fixations, Jiraiya-sama and his perverted nature, and of course Yondaime and his abnormal cheerfulness and ramen addiction. The rank of Junin, it was said, was cursed. Or maybe it was the tortuous Junin exam that drove that all over the brink of insanity. There's a kid staying with me. Hokage-sama assigned me to him for protection. Guy understood everything in those 2 sentences. Something happened on our way to dinner. He's not well. What's his name? Kakashi hesitated again. While he knew the man had a good heart, he had seen many turn into unrecognizable monsters at the mention of the Kyuubi Gaki. He need not have worried, though Guy tolerated, and even respected, silver wolves, why not fire foxes? Uzumaki Naruto. Guy's eyes narrowed, before they softened. Most of Konoha knew by now about what had happened to the Kyuubi container. Kakashi let loose a breath he had not been aware of holding and turned to the door of his apartment. Let me go first. I don't want to startle him. He entered the hall to find Naruto playing fetch with Pakun. He stifled a laugh at the sight of the bossy, dignified dog playing a child's game. Naruto, it seemed, did not affect just him. I'm home. Those words warmed his heart. Kakashi hadn't had anyone to say them to for a long time. He didn't know why he'd said it either, but it had just seemed right. I bought food for you, from Ichiraku's. It's a nice restaurant, my own sensei used to drag me there all the time. I'll bring you there another day, okay? Kakashi babbled, trying to elicit a response from Naruto. He sighed. When in doubt, go with the obvious. It's miso ramen. The boy's eye lit up at that. Ramen, he yelled. Kakashi and Pakun rolled their eyes at that. The kid was so predictable at times. I brought a friend for dinner, he said lightly. A friend? Naruto stooped his celebration as Guy walked into the room. The boy surveyed the stranger, a somber look on his face. He looks even weirder than you. The boy proclaimed. Naruto, Kakashi said warningly. How rude of you. Never mind, it is foreseeable that one who burns so brightly with the flame of youth should make some mistakes. Naruto looked stunned by the weird statements. Then he spotted the Ichiraku ramen bag in Guy's arms. Ramen. He continued his previous merriment and made a beeline for the bag. It was Guy's turn to stare in astonishment, speechless for once. Kakashi yanked the back of his shirt with slightly more force than he intended and brought Naruto tumbling to the floor ungracefully. The boy scowled at him. Kakashi ignored him. Your ramen is here, he said curtly, temper fraying thin at both of their theatrics. The boy looked up at him and grinned wildly. Arigato, Kakashi ni, he chirped. Guy looked at Kakashi slightly. He looked away. Naruto had taken to calling him Oni-san sometimes, and frankly, Kakashi didn't know what to make of it. Part of him was astonished by the kid's easy acceptance, another part was warmed by the knowledge that Naruto had respect him and think of him as family in such a short time, yet another part was alienated. Kakashi was confused at the moment and scared really at the implication of the word. Family was something he had lost before he was Naruto's age. His mother had died when he was 3. He knew little of her, except that she had been very pretty, cooked eggplant soup, and had been a hunter nin. His father had never been home until he lost his honor and with it his mind. he had died when Kakashi was 7. Takashi, his Aniki, had really been the only family he had known. He had been a Junin and had died when Kakashi was 6, a month before his Otudo had made Genin. Kakashi remembered spending his graduation day in mourning, and alone. The White Fang had been out on mission. He recalled how excitedly he had rushed home, hoping to the news he had made Genin would pull Sakumo out of his depression, only to find a terse note on the kitchen door. Kakashi had often wondered how different his life would be if Takashi were alive. But regrets were not, for this day he had ramen to serve. He poured the ramen into 3 bowls and walked over, somehow managing to transport everything over without spilling a single drop. Naruto, as usual, scarfed down the entire bowl in record time. This time though, Kakashi finished before him. Naruto's eyes bugged out. How did you do that? He demanded, pointing his finger at Kakashi in shock. I had a good teacher, Kakashi replied. The blonde kid sat down with a huff. Kakashi, you have not introduced me. Guy demanded. Ah, yes. Uzumaki Naruto, meet Maida Guy. Such a simple introduction is unworthy of me. I am Konoha's foremost taijutsu expert, Maida Guy, the beautiful green beast. Kakashi grinned. He had great fun watching others' eyes boggle when Guy did that. Naruto, though, was not most people. I am Uzumaki Naruto, and I will be the future Hokage one day. He hollered. Guy stood up and towered over the kid before enlightening him about the greatness of Konoha's green beast. Naruto responded with an equally egoistic remark. Kakashi smirked broadly. It was amusing to watch Guy being bested in loudness and boasting by a 6-year-old. On second thought, it was terrifying. Pakun ambled over to watch the show and plopped himself in Kakashi's lap. And I thought you were crazy, the nin dog remarked to its master. So the kid has some talent at getting nin dogs to obey, A potential successor, perhaps. Kakashi was disconcerted by the question, so he avoided it by relying on a tactic he had used since he was a child. When confused, say nothing. Ah, he replied. Pakun glared at him, miffed at the reticent reply. Why'd I even bother? The dog muttered angrily. Kakashi smiled at it and Pakun grumbled before settling down. He knew Kakashi was unhinged. It was just that ever since he quit the Anbu and taken in that blonde kid, he had grown even weirder. Karain had commented that their master smiled more. Pakun agreed. In fact, what he found most unsettling were the Junin's odd smiles. They were odd on the kid's face. The Kakashi he was used to never smiled. He could be kind sometimes, yes. Like when he rubbed them all down after tiring missions, or when he let the pups tear his house to shreds whenever they needed the exercise. He was good-hearted and loyal to the fault, sharing much of his summons characteristics. It was why they had stuck with him through all the rough patches. But he was never pleasant, not until now. The kid then, was the reason for the change. Actually, Pakun could understand why. The brat was just so loud and bright, it took a lot to stay gloomy and morose around him. When the kid was sad though, it was unnatural and it made you want to cheer him up. Naruto, the nin dog thought sagely, really was a piece of work. He was displaced when Kakashi stood to make tea and break out the shugi board. Kakashi invited Guy to a game of taijutsu and Guy accepted with a nervous grin. The taijutsu expert was passable at the game, just barely. Naruto watched them both intently and Kakashi was surprised that the young boy could sit still for so long. Deja vu crept over him as he sipped hot tea while explaining a move to Naruto. He could almost hear Yondaime teasing him. Kakashi-kun, you should know better than to move that there. I'll just take it. Tisk, tisk. I thought you were a genius. He pushed all memories away, and smiled when Naruto laughed at a comment from Guy. It was nice, he decided, to smile. Eventually, Naruto yawned, fatigue creeping up on him. The emotional rollercoaster he had gone through, from being happy, to disappointed, then happy again, and then depressed, before finally being restored to his normal hyper mood, had taken a heavy toll on both his body and mind. Kakashi's eyes noticed the sleepy boy and he decided to end the game in a single move. No, my rival has defeated me, yet again. The count is 23 to 28 now. Guy yelled with tears streaming down his eyes. Naruto-kun, it's time to go to bed for you. But Kakashi-ni-san, the boy whined. Naruto. Bed. Now, Kakashi said, fervently hoping the boy would not have nightmares again. The frequency of his dreams had decreased in the past weeks and had finally stopped this week. He prayed that today's incident would not trigger off another round of nightmares. Especially not when the boy had school the next day. Do I really have to? I was having fun. Naruto pouted. You have school tomorrow, he sternly reminded the boy. Naruto sighed and started off toward the bathroom. He hated going to sleep. It was in his nature, as a 6-year-old boy, to want to stay awake forever. If only Kakashi would let him, he sighed moodily and stomped off in a childish tantrum. It was so unfair. Kakashi watched the boy go bemusedly. Maybe you should have let him stay awake a while more, Guy suggested worriedly. Kakashi looked over at him, smiling as he realized that Guy was as clueless as he had been at first. Yeah, he needs his sleep. Don't worry, he changes moods faster than Anko, he said. They both snickered at the thought of the Mercurial Anbu member. Anko, as a child, had been a rude, cold, snobbish genius. Anko as a teenager was a loud, boisterous sadist. She had changed a lot. Kakashi sobered at that. She had changed after Orochimaru had left, and no one knew when he was coming back. He let Naruto say goodbye to Pakun and Guy before walking the ladder out. So, dinner was nice, We should do this again, Guy said as he opened the door. Yes, we should, Kakashi said truthfully this time. Guy turned to leave. Ah, Guy, the Junin paused. Arigato, Kakashi said quietly, the unfamiliar word rolling off his tongue awkwardly. Hitaki Kakashi rarely had occasion to thank anyone. He lived isolated of the world, independent of all of them. But no man was an island, as he was slowly learning. And this was a start. Guy turned around again, a small smile playing at his lips, his eyes serious. Take care of him, he's special. Kakashi smiled back for once. I don't let my precious ones die, Guy, he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth before he processed them. Guy nodded and returned to his own apartment, 2 doors down from Kakashi's. Kakashi returned to the apartment and found Naruto already asleep. He washed the ramen bowls and sat on his couch for some time as the implication of his words sunk in. Somehow, deep down inside, he had known. Naruto was a precious person, and he would do everything to protect him. All the more reason for him to find out who had attacked the boy. The full moon winked down at them that night. Naruto slept soundlessly. He had another long day tomorrow.